All right, so I was talking to Halima. Now, hands up, who shoots with a square stance? Who shoots with an open stance? About 50-50, 60-30, 60-40, something like that within our team. So whether you shoot with a square stance or an open stance, foot placement and the consistency of your foot placement, it matters a lot, okay? So I want to demonstrate to you a couple of scenarios. So I was talking to Halima before. She shoots with an open stance. Now with a square stance, one of the benefits of a square stance is it's actually much easier to create a frame of reference and line it up with the target, right? Because you're just literally lining your toes up with where you're pointing the bow. However, one thing that's important to understand with a square stance is that your stance isn't necessarily square with the shooting line. If you're standing in the central position on the target, then it is. But if you're standing on either side, you have to adjust your stance to be pointing towards the target because you'll be on an acute angle to the target. Enough said? Pretty straightforward. With an open stance, however, you still have to consider that. Your stance needs to be aligned with the target. However, because the angle is different, you have to be very, very precise with your foot placement, and it takes a little bit more practice to get it there. So, for example, a common open stance will be something like this, right? Where I've opened my hips and my shoulders to the target from setup position, and I'm probably facing about 15 or 20 degrees towards the target. The most open stances are usually not more than about 30 degrees. For example, Brady Ellison, I've measured he's 25 degrees open to the target, okay? And he's got quite an open stance. But most archers that shoot with an open stance are about 15 or 20 degrees open to the target, and this is pretty good. Okay, let's say that this is my normal open stance, but I'm Halima, so I'm inconsistent. So now I position my stance like this, and I'm slightly too open. In which direction are my mistakes more likely to go? To the left, like Beyonce? Maybe, but you might have mistakes to the left. However, it's a bit counterintuitive, this one, because if you think about what happens, like the cascading impact of this from the way up, you train with this stance all the time, and so we have our open stance, and the stance sets the angle of the hips. So when you have an open stance, you have an open angle of the hips. But then when you come into pre-draw position through that rotation of the core, your shoulders are aligned to the target, so you have this angle through the torso. Make sense? Now, if your stance is open, you won't quite be in shoulder alignment, will you? Because shoulder alignment will be pointing that direction, so it'll actually bring it in. And when you're out of shoulder alignment, you have to overdraw on the drawing side to get it through the clicker, and you're more likely to break in this way, as well as have to overextend and then do a forward release, right? Because once you've overextended on the drawing side, there's nowhere left to go. There's nowhere left to expand, so you're more likely to collapse, okay? So if you have your stance open, yes, you may have mistakes to the left, but it's just as likely that because of inconsistencies in your shoulder alignment, you can actually drop mistakes to the left, but to the right as well. Does that make sense? So the stance sets the angle of the hips. If you do shoot with an open stance, I would highly recommend anytime you go to a tournament, become very, very accustomed with aligning your stance to the target. As soon as you step up to the line, make sure you have a frame of reference visually to line it up very precisely. The other thing I've done with archers, particularly with an open stance, is to get them like one of those, like a welcome mat that you have at the front of your house. And actually we paint the shooting line on it, and then we paint footprints on it, okay? So that when you're training at home, you can actually have very, very precise foot placement, and then through that training, it gets reinforced, and you can, through some volume training at home when you're all doing your blank butt and stuff, you get really, really consistent with that foot placement, and eventually you can take away the mat and you'll still be very, very precise. Sarah, you shot with an open stance, correct? And so Sarah used to use those golf tees. I've seen you use them before. So before even shooting starts on a tournament or on a practice field, she would walk up, she would align herself with the target, she'd put her little markers in the ground, little golf tees or something like that, and then walk away. so that every time she stands up, the first thing she do is set her stance very, very precisely. Makes sense. Any questions? Okay, control, flow, commit on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Control, flow, commit.
Getting there.